What happens when a grandson sees his grandfather not as a man, but as a bank account to be drained? On a chilly Monday morning in Providence, 21-year-old Tyler Patterson stepped into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom with all the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him everything. Designer jacket gleaming under the courtroom lights, sneakers sparkling, phone in hand, he carried an air of entitlement that screamed privilege over principle. Yet this wasn't a gala or a fashion show. It was the moment his entire moral compass would be put to the test. Across the room sat Staff Sergeant Robert Bobby Patterson, 82 years old, a Korean War veteran whose hands, weathered from decades of service and labor, trembled slightly as he clutched his veteran cap. He had survived the horrors of combat, decades of hard work, and the loss of his beloved wife, Emma. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the betrayal that stood before him. His own grandson had been siphoning off his military pension for months, treating the very life he fought to protect as a personal playground. Judge Caprio's eyes, calm yet penetrating, scanned the room, sensing the tension between history and youth sacrifice and entitlement. The air was thick with the weight of decades lived, battles fought, and trust shattered. How could a young man justify taking the hard-earned security of an elder as a means to fund his whims? And more importantly, what lesson would the court deliver that day? Punishment, understanding, or a chance at redemption? Before the first words were spoken, the audience held their breath. The courtroom wasn't just a place of law. It was the stage for a confrontation that would test family bonds, morality, and the very meaning of respect for those who served. Could Tyler Patterson see beyond his own desire for luxury and recognize the cost of his actions? And would justice, tempered with compassion, guide him back to the man his grandfather knew he could be? The story of betrayal began long before the courtroom doors opened. Tyler Patterson had spent 8 months quietly siphoning money from his grandfather's military pension, all while presenting himself as a dutiful grandson, helping manage finances. Every transaction, every unauthorized credit card charge, and every withdrawal from Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson's hard-earned pension was framed as assistance, a twisted attempt at modernizing his grandfather's financial life. Yet the truth was starkly different. Tyler was funding his own lifestyle parties, expensive clothes and bar tabs at the direct expense of the man who had survived war and decades of labor. Seated in the gallery, Staff Sergeant Patterson remained composed, though his hands shook slightly as they gripped his veteran cap. His mind, as sharp as the day he left Korea, cataloged each violation of trust. He had believed in Tyler's promise to help to manage bills and protect his modest home from scams. Instead, he discovered that the grandson he trusted saw him as nothing more than a financial instrument. Every morning, the man who had fought to safeguard freedom, who had spent 40 years building a secure life, awoke to find that security systematically stripped away. Judge Caprio's eyes observed the unfolding family tragedy with the wisdom earned from decades on the bench. He had seen greed, entitlement, and familial conflict before, but the casual cruelty displayed by Tyler was particularly jarring. Here was a young man barely out of adolescence who treated the courtroom like a minor inconvenience, checking his phone while the fate of a war veteran's dignity hung in the balance. He shrugged off the charges: financial exploitation of an elderly person, identity theft, and fraudulent use of military benefits with a dismissive grandpa gets confused about money stuff. I was just helping him. The courtroom reacted with stunned silence punctuated by murmurs of disapproval. Elderly spectators shook their heads knowingly. The weight of Tyler's words struck deep. Across from him, Staff Sergeant Patterson stood to address the court. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady. "I may be 82, but my mind is as sharp as when I served in Korea 70 years ago. I know exactly what Tyler has been doing with my pension money, and it has nothing to do with confusion or help." Tyler, unbothered, interrupted, insisting he was protecting his grandfather from modern financial complexity. Judge Caprio's patience, however, remained deliberate and measured. "Mr. Patterson," he said firmly, "you will not interrupt your grandfather. Sergeant Patterson, please continue." And with the dignity honed by decades of military discipline, Robert Patterson detailed how his grandson had taken what was meant to secure his independence, leaving him to borrow money from neighbors just to keep the lights on. Each example was a direct assault not only on finances, but on trust, autonomy, and respect. The courtroom air grew thick with tension as Tyler attempted to rationalize his behavior. He painted his theft as a form of generosity, claiming, "I was investing the money in experiences for both of us." The audience recoiled. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed, his voice steady, yet full of authority. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "are you suggesting that stealing your grandfather's pension to fund your entertainment represents modernization?" Tyler's shrug and casual tone only deepened the collective outrage. Even as he tried to justify his actions, the stark reality of Tyler's exploitation became increasingly clear. He had misappropriated every penny of a lifetime of sacrifice, using it to fuel his own desires, while his grandfather endured anxiety, financial strain, and the humiliation of betrayal. The courtroom had become a stage where innocence, duty, and honor confronted entitlement, manipulation, and moral failure. Judge Caprio watched closely, knowing that the lesson delivered here would need to balance justice with a chance at redemption, a lesson in accountability that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the tension between Tyler Patterson and his grandfather escalated. Tyler's casual indifference to the charges, paired with his repeated interruptions, revealed not just ignorance, but a startling lack of empathy. Every attempt he made to rationalize his theft, calling it financial modernization, or an effort to create experiences for both of us, only deepened the outrage within the courtroom. The audience watched horrified as the young man dismissed decades of sacrifice with a shrug and a smirk. Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson, despite his age, held firm. His voice carried the weight of experience and moral authority. "Tyler convinced me to give him account access for automatic bill payments so I wouldn't worry about utilities or medical expenses. I trusted him because he's my grandson, my only family, since Emma passed away 5 years ago. Instead of helping, he took every penny for his own entertainment." Each word resonated, painting a vivid picture of betrayal and the erosion of trust. Judge Frank Caprio, observing this interplay, allowed the veteran to speak, but his eyes betrayed a simmering resolve. He had seen the worst in human behavior, yet the deliberate exploitation of a family member's trust, especially that of a war veteran, struck a deep chord. Tyler's repeated defenses, claiming he was preventing his grandfather from hoarding or that he was investing in experiences, were met with silence from the audience, punctuated by murmurs of disbelief and disapproval. It was clear to everyone present this was not misunderstanding or negligence. It was systematic financial abuse. The situation escalated further when Staff Sergeant Patterson revealed that Tyler had convinced him to co-sign a credit card, which Tyler then ran up to $8,000 at bars and clothing stores. Tyler's defense: "I'll pay it back when I get my inheritance." The casual discussion of his grandfather's death as a financial opportunity stunned the room. Judge Caprio's calm authority turned firm. "Mr. Patterson, did you just admit to viewing your grandfather's resources as your future inheritance, while he is still alive and relying on those funds for his security?" Tyler, seemingly puzzled, responded with economic rationalizations about life expectancy and resource allocation. His words were clinical, as if human life were merely a line item in a spreadsheet. This cold, calculated perspective revealed the moral void that had allowed him to exploit his grandfather so thoroughly. Staff Sergeant Patterson's eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief fixed on Tyler. "When did you stop seeing me as your grandfather and start seeing me as a financial asset to be liquidated?" Judge Caprio intervened decisively. He outlined the seriousness of the financial harm, detailing bank statements, pension withdrawals, and unauthorized credit card charges that totaled over $15,000 in just 8 months. Each figure was not merely numbers, it represented the veteran's lost peace of mind, independence, and dignity. Tyler's flippant justifications met the judge's measured, unwavering scrutiny, highlighting the stark difference between legal accountability and moral responsibility. By the end of this rising action, the courtroom had witnessed the full scope of betrayal. A grandson exploiting a grandfather's trust, a veteran standing resolute despite personal anguish, and a judge preparing to balance justice with the potential for redemption. The stakes were clear, the emotions raw, and the lesson imminent. Tyler Patterson was on the precipice of facing the consequences of not only his illegal actions, but also his moral failures, a confrontation that would demand both accountability and introspection. The tension in the courtroom reached a turning point when Judge Caprio shifted from assessing evidence to guiding moral reckoning. Tyler Patterson, previously dismissive and arrogant, began to sense the weight of his actions as the courtroom absorbed the full story. His excuses, financial modernization, shared experiences, and future inheritance suddenly sounded hollow against the detailed account of loss and betrayal presented by Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson. The veteran's dignity, independence, and trust had been systematically eroded, and the courtroom collectively felt the gravity of this generational breach. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his calm voice now carrying a quiet intensity. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "you have treated your grandfather's life and savings as a resource for your entertainment. Have you considered the personal cost of your actions, not just legally, but morally?" Tyler for the first time paused. The young man's usual smirk faltered. The judge's words were not just an admonishment. They were a mirror reflecting the emptiness of his rationale. The turning point arrived when Judge Caprio proposed a path that combined accountability with restoration. Instead of immediately resorting to prison, he offered Tyler a structured chance to make amends, full restitution of the stolen pension, 300 hours of community service at the Providence Veterans Center, financial counseling focused on elder abuse, awareness, and weekly visits to his grandfather to listen, learn, and rebuild trust. The courtroom absorbed the gravity of this approach, justice tempered by opportunity for redemption. Tyler's reaction was a mixture of surprise and apprehension. The community service and counseling represented not punishment for punishment's sake, but a moral education, a confrontation with the consequences of his entitlement. The weekly visits with his grandfather, once a source of casual interaction, became a tool to restore empathy, respect, and familial bonds. Judge Caprio's intervention reframed the narrative. Tyler was no longer simply a defendant, but a student of accountability and character. Staff Sergeant Patterson, maintaining composure despite visible emotion, expressed cautious optimism. "If Tyler follows this path, perhaps we can heal what has been damaged," he said. His words highlighted the rare possibility of family reconciliation in the midst of betrayal. The veteran's willingness to allow redemption demonstrated both courage and wisdom, illustrating that justice could coexist with compassion. The courtroom's energy shifted. Tyler's arrogance began to soften, replaced with uncertainty and self-reflection. The turning point was clear. A young man who had reduced his grandfather's life savings to a mere ledger of numbers was confronted with the human reality of the harm he had caused. Every dollar stolen now carried the weight of trust, broken independence threatened, and dignity undermined. For the first time, Tyler's actions were measured not by their immediate gratification, but by their long-term moral consequences. Judge Caprio concluded this pivotal moment by emphasizing the principle behind the opportunity he offered. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "the law holds you accountable, but it also offers a chance to learn to restore and to become a person your grandfather and society can respect. Redemption is earned, not given." This moment crystallized the story's turning point, the shift from conflict and exploitation to awareness, responsibility, and the possibility of moral growth. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Caprio prepared to deliver the sentence that would balance accountability with the possibility of redemption. Tyler Patterson, who had spent months treating his grandfather's military pension as a personal bank account, now faced the tangible consequences of his actions. Judge Caprio's voice, measured but firm, carried the weight of decades of experience, justice, and moral insight. "Tyler Patterson," the judge began, "you have committed multiple felonies, financial exploitation of an elderly person, identity theft, and fraudulent use of military benefits. This is not simply about money. It is about trust, dignity, and respect. However, your grandfather's request for mercy and your potential for understanding give this court an opportunity to transform punishment into education." The sentence was comprehensive. Tyler was required to return the full amount stolen, $15,400, within 30 days. He would also complete 300 hours of community service at the Providence Veterans Center, engaging directly with veterans who had sacrificed for the country he had taken for granted. Weekly visits to his grandfather were mandated not for financial gain, but to listen, learn, and rebuild familial bonds. Additionally, Tyler was enrolled in weekly financial counseling sessions focused on elder abuse awareness, and he would submit monthly reflections on his progress and the lessons learned from these interactions. The courtroom, once filled with tension and disbelief, now held a sense of anticipation as the moral weight of the sentence settled. Tyler's initial shock and reluctance gave way to the slow realization that this was not a mere legal formality. It was an opportunity to understand the human cost of his actions. Judge Caprio's words were clear: real justice does not merely punish, it instructs and restores. This sentence, Judge Caprio continued, is designed to ensure you recognize the value of integrity, the importance of respect for elders, and the responsibilities that come with family bonds. It is not enough to simply repay the money. You must comprehend the harm done and actively work to restore trust. Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson, watching from the gallery, felt a cautious relief. The sentence was rigorous, yet it held the promise of rehabilitation rather than complete severance of the family relationship. Tyler's compliance with restitution service and engagement with his grandfather would offer him a chance to reclaim his moral compass and begin repairing the damage he had caused. The broader lesson resonated far beyond the courtroom walls. Justice, as illustrated by Judge Caprio's handling of the case, requires not only enforcement of the law, but also nurturing accountability, empathy, and moral growth. Exploitation of trust, especially within family, has profound consequences. Yet guidance, structured responsibility, and compassion can redirect even the most wayward individuals toward a path of understanding, respect, and redemption. By the end of the hearing, the courtroom had witnessed a profound transformation, the convergence of law, morality, and education. Tyler Patterson would leave not only accountable for his misdeeds, but with the tools and responsibility to rebuild his character, honor his grandfather's sacrifices, and understand the profound difference between entitlement and respect. The highest lesson of all wealth in its truest sense is measured not in dollars, but in integrity, honor, and the ability to restore trust where it has been broken. Months passed after the courtroom drama, and a subtle transformation had begun. Tyler Patterson no longer walked with the casual arrogance that had defined his entrance. His designer clothes were replaced with simple, practical attire, his demeanor more reflective, less self-assured. Every week he met with his grandfather, Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson, not to ask for favors or cash, but to listen. He absorbed stories of Korea, of 40 years of labor, and of the life lessons Emma and Robert had built together. Each visit chipped away at the moral blind spot that had allowed him to see his grandfather as a source of profit rather than a man of honor. At the Providence Veterans Center, Tyler's 300 hours of community service became lessons in humility and empathy. He served meals, assisted elderly veterans with errands, and listened attentively to the sacrifices these men and women had made. Slowly, he began to comprehend the depth of his grandfather's service and the gravity of exploiting someone so devoted to duty. This hands-on experience, far removed from the legal lectures and courtroom arguments, became the crucible in which Tyler's understanding and compassion were forged. Returning to Judge Caprio's courtroom for final review, Tyler approached with a quiet confidence rooted in genuine change. He had completed restitution, fulfilled all community service hours, attended counseling sessions, and faithfully documented his weekly reflections. As he recounted his learnings, his voice carried humility. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, I saw my grandfather as an old man sitting on money he wasn't using. I've learned he's a Korean War veteran who built financial security through decades of sacrifice. I stole not only his money, but his peace of mind." Staff Sergeant Patterson's pride was quiet, but unmistakable. He acknowledged the visible growth in his grandson, accountability, empathy, and recognition of the value of respect. Together they discussed family history, shared memories of Emma, and even mundane chores, each interaction reinforcing trust and connection. Tyler's transformation was not instantaneous, but deliberate, a product of facing the consequences of his actions while actively rebuilding character and relationships. Judge Caprio observed the reunion with measured satisfaction. "Mr. Patterson," he addressed Tyler, "you entered this courtroom seeing your grandfather as a financial asset. You leave as someone who understands that family means protection, respect, and integrity." The formal charges were dismissed, but the lessons endured. Real wealth comes not from money, but from character, honor, and the ability to restore trust where it has been broken. Outside the courthouse, Tyler walked beside his grandfather at a slower pace, listening as Robert shared stories of courage, resilience, and dignity. For the first time, Tyler truly saw him not as an account to exploit, but as a man whose life embodied values far beyond dollars. This was the ultimate redemption, a young man learning the profound difference between entitlement and responsibility, and a family rebuilding the bonds that betrayal had threatened to sever. The story leaves a lasting message. Justice can punish, but it can also heal. Redemption is possible when accountability meets education, and love is powerful enough to demand honesty, respect, and moral growth. For every viewer, the lesson is clear. Treasure your elders, protect their dignity, and understand that true wealth lies in the integrity of your actions, not the numbers in an account.